Everdark, Episode 99, Ruthless. Last on Everdark, Christian determines to release Daemon. They go to the armory and choose magical weapons, daggers for Christian and a bow for Fiona. But these weapons could have destroyed them just as easily as what awaits them in the Everdark. Christian accepts this risk, and the risk of trusting Daemon. We turn back to Julian and Daemon at the museum. The smell of blood flowed over Daemon like a tidal wave as they lightly walked up the steps and into the brightly lit museum. His eyelids fluttered nearly shut as the scent of hundreds of well-fed and mostly healthy humans entered his nostrils like the largest floral bouquets. His veins and arteries felt as if they were filled with dust when faced with such a feast. Julian glanced over at him nervously.
"Are you okay? Is it too much?"
His fledgling was already so attuned to him. His wants, his needs, his desires, even the slightest discomfort, and Julian wanted to help. Always to help and succor. But he also knew his fledgling was worried for the humans too. Julian was just beginning to understand his power and his hunger. He smiled and patted Julian's arm that was linked with his. "I am fine, but I must do some grazing." Julian's eyebrows listed even as an uncertain smile lit up his face.
"Grazing? Well, what do you—"
"It is a game," Daemon explained. "You drink from as many unsuspecting people as you can. You see how long it is before anyone notices."
"Well, if you use your Iros gift, then no one will notice, right?"
But Daemon shook his head. "No, you must do it without using mind control. Well, not exactly mind control. Every vampire can seduce a human. That is what you are limited to." Julian considered this.
"Sounds challenging."
"It is, which is why it is fun. Especially in a place such as this, where there are so many people and, potentially, so many witnesses," Daemon told him.
"Are you going to try it here?"
Julian looked a combination of intrigued and scandalized with his wide eyes and flushed cheeks. Daemon thought he would do it just to amaze his fledgling. It would be a teaching lesson as well. Julian could not actually drink from another yet, not for some time, and Daemon wasn't even sure he ever wanted Julian to drink from another. But a simple press of lips to the nape of a neck, or a brush of fangs across a throat would do. "I think I may. I think you may as well. We shall see." Daemon pulled Julian closer to him as they approached two men in dark suits, earpieces, and grim expressions that asked for the invite. Julian looked alarmed.
"We forgot to get the invite from Arceus."
"There is no need." Daemon smiled broadly as he turned to the rude man who thought to bar their entrance to this delectable feast. "We are invited." The security guard's craggy face went blank for a moment, before emotions flooded back in. It took no effort at all to have the man not only usher them in, but smile as he did so, which, from the briefest touch of his mind, Daemon knew he hardly did in his normal life. The museum foyer reminded Daemon a bit of Everdark architecture, with its white marble, soaring vaulted ceiling, gold and silver inlay, and the general sense of grandeur. This greeting room stood 100 feet long and just as wide. People on the second floor leaned on balcony railings to look down at the first floor and scope out those that had just come inside. The bones of a monstrous beast were linked together to present a fiction of its stalking invisible prey, though one sniff told Daemon that those bones were fake, made of something light and papery, so that they could soar easily on the thin wires that held them together and upright. The originals were likely someplace in the museum, as he did scent true bone that was not human in this place. There were elaborate paintings on the walls in between the arched hallways that stood twice as tall as him, done in vibrant oils that seemed to induce one to look closer at their shadows and light. The hallways that led deeper into the museum's interior were intriguing to Daemon. In glass boxes that were lit artfully from below were the relics of former human ages. Coins, pottery, armor, jewelry, and more. Humanity seemed obsessed with its own history, a history that it could not fully remember. That was likely why Henry was so obsessed with speaking to Arceus. As fascinating as vampire and immortal history might be, humans seemed to be desperately looking for their own. It was something he would have to remember. People dressed in tuxedos, similar to his and Julian's, but few as finely made, and others in dresses that glittered with inlaid gemstones or cut from shimmery silk, danced and weaved all about them. Their conversation was bright, and sometimes brittle. For many, coming here was to put on a play. They were acting for the benefit of others. Some laughed too loudly, others nervously fingered their finery. Some narrowed their eyes and drank too much of the fizzy champagne or dark red wine, not for pleasure, but to calm nerves or numb bad feelings. There were shark-like smiles as men and women circled each other, looking for advantage and weakness. It was all very familiar to him, for as much as things changed, they also stayed the same. And as loath as he was to admit it, with his rosy-coloured glasses on, in the past the immortals had been like this too. Not with him, but with each other. Callie had tried to tell him this. Iros had too, with a laugh though. And Seer had tried to weave these bad traits into a good future. Don't you see that we couldn't be our best selves without you, Daemon? Callie's voice flitted in his mind. Daemon's head jerked up, but he was not sure if he imagined this voice or if it had been real. His focus turned back to the security man he'd enthralled, who had led them into the very center of the beautiful room and enthused, "There's champagne being served. Oi, Janet, bring the gents some glasses of the best stuff. There." Special guests, Daemon suggested to him, even as Julian's eyebrows lifted more. His fledgling knew of their powers and how easy this was for him, but it still felt so new and amazing seeing it done in a place where Julian had been before. The guard, his name was George, nodded and smiled. "Special guests." One of the servers, dressed in a short black skirt and white top with a frozen smile on her face, Janet, evidently, frowned. George was not her favorite, and he wasn't to give her orders. He might be security for the museum, but she worked for the catering staff. So what if they had dated an age ago? That didn't give him a right to order her about and— "Janet?" Julian's voice rolled out warm and sweet, with a hint of the Iros gift in it. His fledgling was so handsome that even without the gift he likely could get his way in many situations. Janet looked at Julian and pinked. Even though George had just said her name, it seemed miraculous to her that this gorgeous guy knew it. And didn't he look familiar? Like a celebrity or something? She wasn't sure. She'd seen him before, but he was much too good-looking. And oh, he had such kind yet mesmerizing eyes, to be just a normal person in a normal job.
Yes?
Janet answered as if her name was a question to her as well. Julian's smile broadened and he reached into his pocket. When his fingers appeared, between them was a $100 bill. He took her hand and pressed it against her palm as he said,
I'd really appreciate it if you could get my friend here the best champagne and appetizers tonight. Would you be willing to do that?
She nodded dumbly, looking up at Julian with wide, glassy eyes.
Oh, of course.
Julian dazzled her with another smile.
We really appreciate it.
I'm happy to.
She looked about ready to pass out from that happiness, and Daemon hid his amusement and pride behind a cough. She was carrying a silver tray full of glasses of champagne, but when Daemon moved to lift two up for him and Julian, she waved him back. Whispering conspiratorially, she said,
Oh, this is swill. I'll be back with something special for you both. Stuff that's saved for the mayor and his cronies. Don't you worry.
We so look forward to it, Janet, Daemon murmured. That had her giggling and racing off. Julian turned to George, who was looking at them with a beaming smile as if he was the proud parent of two very good children. The other security guard was glancing over at him with a strange expression that was turning into an aggrieved one as the line into the museum had turned from 2 lines to 1. Thank you, George. You best get back to your post, Daemon suggested. With a sigh, George nodded, wished them a wonderful evening and went back to the marble-arched doorway to check invites and let in approved guests. All he would remember of them, if he remembered at all, would be that he had met someone very special, people who had been respectful to him as well.
That was cool, but a little creepy at the same time.
Julian laughed and shook his head.
Though man, being able to charm people like that in some of the sticky situations that Christian and I have been in would have been quite handy.
Like the French village, Daemon suggested. Julian nodded.
But would it have worked as well on people who were intent on sacrificing us?
Of course, Daemon answered without hesitation. Humans are not known for their abilities to withstand mind control. You might find a person or two that is slightly resistant, but those who would serve a squall would be quite open to suggestion. Julian's forehead furrowed.
Do you really think it was a squall?
Daemon nodded. Undoubtedly. If two such creatures were to exist in interconnected worlds, it would not surprise me. Things slipped through from the Everdark, Callie said, or he imagined Callie saying. The vampires had no control over it. I thought that no one did, until you returned and I saw differently. You did not tell anyone of this connection you have, not even Iros, not even me. The hurt in Callie's possibly imagined voice was so like them. Daemon almost sighed. Callie had always wanted perfect transparency between them. Sharing secrets meant intimacy. It was the only way that Callie understood that term. Knowledge was power, and sharing knowledge was to share that power. And you had to love and trust to share power. Julian lifted his head up to study Daemon's face.
But you are humanoid. Not altogether human if people look closely at you, but you're definitely like people here.
Daemon could hear the hunger for answers in Julian's tone as well as his mind. Callie's love of knowledge was to hoard it, and then use it when it best suited them to gain an advantage. Julian simply wanted to know, because the world was wondrous and understanding it was the point of existence. Daemon nodded slowly. We picked forms that would be as close to the population we were feeding on as possible.
So what do you really look like?
Julian's eyes were narrowed as he studied Daemon's face as if he could see beyond the flesh and bone. Nothing like this. But it does not matter anymore. This form is the one I wear from now on. Daemon leaned down and kissed Julian's forehead. The furrows immediately smoothed out. His fledgling realizing he wasn't going to have his curiosity satisfied that night.
All right, keep your secrets.
Julian responded good-naturedly.
Besides, tonight is about you learning about modern humans, politicians in particular.
This podcast is not the only thing I do. I actually run my own subscription site, which is like a Patreon, but with far more content. On the site, I have written stories, recorded podcast episodes, and manga. These are all gay romance with something magical about them. Elves, vampires, shifters, mages. You get the idea. And I've been doing this since 2010, before Patreon even existed. I'll tell you more about everything you get, including millions of words of archived stories and the sexy parts of the podcast episodes after the chapter is done.
These humans are but children. The politicians he speaks of will be putty in your hands. Even the ones who are afraid or disgusted by what we are will be eager to do business with you, Callie murmured. They know power. They will want to glom onto yours, as the other immortals did. They will even pretend to have some kind of nobility to earn your favor. Again, just like the immortals did. Daemon's eyes swept the room. There were hundreds of people in the museum. That wasn't necessarily a problem for him. His mind lightly covered them all. He did not feel Callie. There were some vampires there, though, but they were scattered throughout, and none held the signature of an immortal. He was amused, though, that they had finally figured out that he and Julian were there. They edged closer to look, thinking he would not know. They were as much children as the humans were. At that moment, Janet returned. She was bearing her silver platter again, but this time with 2 flutes of champagne and 2 small plates piled with small bites of food. They were the tastiest morsels. Daemon rarely ate this type of food, but he enjoyed it in small amounts, which made these appetizers perfect for his taste. He would try to get bite-sized amounts of everything, but wouldn't have to eat more. There were puffs of bread, filled with melted cheese and ham. There were buttered toasts, heaped with fine black caviar. There were shrimp, topped with tangy red sauce and fiery horseradish. There were delicately fried egg rolls, filled with finely chopped carrots and cabbage, bundles of glass noodles and soy-sautéed pork. There was much more that he couldn't identify through Julian's understanding, but he was anxious to taste them all. He popped one of the egg rolls in his mouth, enjoying the crunch and the umami of sweet and sour and earthy that exploded on his tongue. He let out a pleasurable moan even as he took in a deep breath and scented blood. Hot blood all around him, hot blood waiting for him. Hot blood. You should not waste your time on human food. You need to eat. Kali almost sounded concerned, as they had once had. They rarely bothered themselves with bodily needs. You starved for so long, didn't you? I did look for you, but Seer hid Nightfallen from us. She feared what the other immortals would do. So do not think that I am the only one who saw the dark side of them, my king. Julian smiled winningly at Janet, causing her to nearly swoon once more, even as Daemon ate more of the appetizers on his plate. He hardly tasted them, but he did it anyway because he did not want Kali to be right about anything.
Here's just for starters.
She lowered her voice again. Her actions did make sense. At least half a dozen people had attempted to flag her down or take the food and drink meant for them.
I'll keep watch on you two and make sure you're taken care of.
Thank you, Janet,
Julian said again.
You bet.
With a frighteningly bright smile, she turned on her heel and marched away. Remember now how easy it is to control humans. Your fledgling of but a few days can do it with ease. Did you really think the others wouldn't abuse their power? Kali's voice again drifted through his mind. It came from nowhere and everywhere, so Daemon did not bother to lift his head to scan the crowd. I think you overdid it, Daemon murmured in Julian's left ear, thrusting his uneasiness of what Kali was saying to him, or what he imagined Kali would say if they were here. She was half in love with you without the Iros mind control. Now you've taken her heart. His fledgling colored.
Yeah, well, there's only one heart I want.
Julian put a hand over Daemon's heart. The moment stretched, and the tinkling laughter and voices died away until only each other's heartbeats could be heard. Julian's easy smile was replaced by one that was deeper, but almost more tenuous. Julian wanted to love him completely. He already did, but he was afraid. Julian had loved his parents that well, and they had left. Would Daemon? The Harrows had seemed strong and brave and true, better than others. So how had they ended up prisoners of Kali? Couldn't that happen to Daemon as well? The best were often defeated by the worst. You do not need to fear, Daemon found himself saying. It is not like that. Julian blinked. He had not been consciously aware of these thoughts and fears.
Like what?
Daemon considered how to answer. The truth. Julian would want that even if it were complicated and perhaps not as shiny bright as he believed Daemon to be. I'm not like your parents, Daemon murmured, which had Julian's gaze becoming more shadowed than before. This time out was to distract him from thoughts of them, not to speak of them. Kali is not the villain. Julian's forehead bunched.
I don't understand.
Daemon knew this lack of understanding was an out for him. He could just brush this off and not say more, but he was determined to treat Julian as an equal. Even though part of him wanted to make things easy for Julian, he could not. It would just make this understanding harder later. Oftentimes, the villain is whoever the victor says they are, yes? You know this from your understanding of history, Daemon pressed. Julian gave a half smile and nodded.
Yes, of course.
I know Kali is a villain in many ways when we look at things from our perspectives, Daemon explained slowly. What he did to your parents was wrong, but...
He didn't see it that way. They were no one and nothing to him.
Julian filled in. His expression was unhappy, but he did understand where Daemon was going for this. He saw removing them from the board as keeping safe all that he had built. Callie has no love of people. Daemon gave a rueful smile. But he, above all, would say, what is the point of ruling if there is no one left to rule? Julian's arms crossed over his chest.
So he saw what he was doing as necessary to stop the war and make sure one didn't happen again. Yeah, I get that, but he still misled people. He lied about things that matter. Religion is...
Julian bit his lower lip as he struggled to form his ideas. Finally, he gestured towards some of the beautiful necklaces in a nearby case. Though he knew nothing of human religions, he felt something spiritual about them.
All of this, and not just the obvious religious stuff, represents human search for a greater truth in the world.
Julian explained.
Where do we come from? Why are we here? What is the ultimate best use of the time and talents we're given? Callie took that away from vampires, and humanity too, by creating this false history. It's like he took away the very soul of the people he lied to.
That bothers you greatly. I can see this. Daemon nodded. Julian's jaw tightened.
There's this phrase, peace at any price. That's what Callie did. The price was truth. That's...
Too high? Julian nodded. He turned those purple eyes upon Daemon.
What you were trying to tell me with this stuff about Callie being a villain from a certain point of view is that you are a villain too. That you're not...
Julian was biting his lower lip.
That you aren't like my parents, because you can be an even bigger villain than Callie.
Daemon set the food and drink down on a stone railing around the magnificent fake monster and cupped Julian's face. I am still who you think I am in many ways. I can be that. But I am...
Complicated?
Julian's eyebrows rose. I am a predator, Julian. I am not tame. I am not... He looked around at the people who swirled past them. I am not like them. I am not even like the vampires or the other immortals. Julian studied him.
Yeah, I can sort of see that, sometimes.
He does not truly understand how ruthless you are, and how that makes you mostly untouchable. Callie sounded weary. You will stop at nothing if someone crosses you. Am I in your sights now, my king? I, who have truly served you faithfully while the others almost destroyed all you worked for? Daemon drew his thumbs along Julian's cheeks, relishing the softness of the skin there. People were looking with heavy-lidded desire at the two of them, and some with scandalized pink cheeks. But he did not care. He liked others to see what was his. Just know that you are not going to lose me, my one, Daemon murmured. That is all you need to know. Let that worry go. After a moment, Julian nodded. His fledgling turned his face into Daemon's right palm and kissed it. Daemon smiled broadly. Come, let us graze on these politicians and all who make this city run, Daemon suggested as he placed a hand on Julian's lower back. And though Daemon did not look for Callie as they began to circulate, Daemon knew connections to the immortal were there. He would find them. Like Callie had said, Daemon was ruthless. Join us next time for episode 100, Aggression.
What else do you get as a member of wraithrain.com besides the unedited audio versions of Everdark, Dragon's Reign, and the Sexy Times or Empire of Stars? I write a lot of stories. Far more than Dragon's Reign and Everdark. Everdark is just one of my gay, romantic, epic-length adventures. Since 2010, I've written long gay romance web novels with hot heroes falling in love with each other, whether it's honorable elven warriors, fierce dragon shifters, sensual mermen, fallen angels and demons, and reincarnated immortal vampires. When you join, you can read all of these on my serial membership site. The completed stories are there in full for you to read as fast as you want, and the ongoing stories get 3 chapters every week, so I can torture you with cliffhangers. I mean, entertain you, not torture. Kat, who wrote this script? But don't worry, you can tell me exactly what you think of that in the comments at the end of every chapter. As a member, you can be in my own personal peanut gallery. There's also manga. My first foray into romance was actually yaoi manga. And since the very beginning, I've collaborated with artists to create both Western and Asian graphic novels that are posted one page at a time in the members-only area. Even if you're not a manga person per se, when you're a member, you get them free. So why not check out the amazing detailed work of our artists while waiting for me to post the next chapter? If this sounds interesting to you, try us out for a month. The link to sign up is in the notes. The most you'll pay is $9.95 a month, and you'll be directly supporting us, real people, not big corporations like Amazon or Netflix, not content created with AI. Wraith Rain is a small team of actual humans doing the best we can to transport you with romantic action and adventure stories. We really thank you for your support.